We're going to shift gears now from product and period costs, and we are going to focus on instead cost volume profit. So, cost volume profit is really more about the study of how our profit changes as our volume changes. So, instead of analyzing things in terms of what does it cost to make a product, we're now taking all of the costs that we have, whether they be period cost or product cost, and we're breaking them into three different categories, what we're going to call fixed, variable, and mixed. So before you watch this video, make sure you've taken a moment to look at our example here about planning a Super Bowl celebration and look to see what the question is asking. How many tickets do we need to sell to cover all of our cost? So again, before you watch the rest of this video, go ahead and pause it and see if you can figure it out. So now that you've taken some time to figure out how many tickets we need to sell to cover the cost, did anybody get 250 tickets? So we're going to walk through how exactly it is that we got that. So the first thing we need to remember with cost volume profit is we have to break costs into variable costs, fixed cost, or mixed cost. Now we're going to talk more about those in a later video, but what that really means is that there are costs that change in proportion to our volume, and there are costs that do not change in proportion to our volume. So the costs that are said to change in proportion to our volume are variable costs. So if we look at this, which is the variable cost? That's right, the $15 per person. Since it's per person, this is going to be considered variable cost. Now, if we're able to find a room for 500, and no matter if we have one person at our party or 500 people at our party, the cost is $2,500. So that is considered a fixed cost. So the difference between fixed and variable, you can see, is that variable in total is going to change the more activity or volume we have. But individually, as a unit price of $15 or a cost, it stays the same. Now, fixed costs are a little bit different. We can have anywhere between 1 and 500 people. With 500 people, we'd be getting the most bang for our buck, if you will, at a fixed cost of $2,500. But if we had one person at the party, that means we're paying $2,500 for one person at that party. So that's kind of a short introduction. Again, we're going to cover those in a little bit more detail in a later video, but I want you to really think about this idea instead of product cost and period cost, variable, fixed, and mixed. So how do we solve this? Now there's a standard equation that I want you to think about, and we are going to look at our selling price per unit, which can be abbreviated as such. And we said $25 is what we're going to think about charging. So that's our selling price per unit. Now, we also have what's known as a variable cost per unit. Now, notice it's not fixed cost per unit. This is variable cost per unit. We found that to be $15. So if we subtract that, we end up with $10 for every ticket sold that can help us cover the cost of that fixed cost. So this $10 is known as contribution margin per unit. And if you think about this, what we're really saying is that for every ticket sold, that ticket is going to contribute or give us some extra to cover our total fixed cost. Now you might be saying, okay, well, how'd you get the 250? Well, now it's a little bit easier. So if our fixed cost equal 2,500, if we divide that by our contribution margin per unit, that's going to tell us that we need to sell 250 tickets to cover all of our fixed cost. Now, let's prove this out down here below, okay? So, if we take $25 times 250, that equals 6,250. And so this is what's known as sales or revenue, okay? Now, if I take my $15 times 250, I get 37.50. And this is my variable cost. So in total, if I take sales minus variable cost, I get 2,500 of contribution margin. Now, if I subtract my total fixed costs, I can now see that I end up with 0 net income. Now remember, the question just asked, how many tickets do we need to sell to cover our fixed cost? So when we're thinking about this and we're looking at our RSVP list, guess what? We want to make sure that we get to at least 250 people to attend our celebration. Because in that case, we're covering all of our fixed cost and we've already taken into account those variable costs. Now, if we have 250 people coming, we're only going to get food for 250 people. But if we have 500 people coming, we're going to order food for 500 people. But if we don't change the selling price and we don't change the cost of the food, which is $15, our contribution margin doesn't change. That's still $10 a ticket. So if we sold 251 tickets, how much net income would we earn? So think about that for just a minute. If it takes 250 tickets to break even, the point at which our total revenues or our total sales equal total cost is break even, and we sold one more than that, how much would our profit be? You're right. It's our contribution margin per unit. So our profit would be $10 if we sold 251. Now, I bet you can figure it out if we sold 500 tickets. And again, assuming in cost volume profit, none of these costs are changing. When we do this analysis, if we change our selling price, that's a different analysis. If we changed our variable cost per unit, that's a different analysis. Okay, so the what we just walked through here is just an understanding of how those costs behave in terms of the number of tickets sold. And that's the start of cost volume profit.